The content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification button. And please, feel free to share the video. Thank you. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD. You tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. What's cracking? What's happening? Before I get things started, I want to give a shout out to all the members of the Green Gorilla channel and all the people in the chat. Mr. Hammer, I see you there. Sir Abaduya, I see you there. Charles Faulkner, what's up, dog? Spencer Applewhite, what's cracking? Barry Little, Gemini Getting Knowledge, Darnell Smith, Alan Wiley, Mr. Valentino, Jason Hales, The Final Watcher, Black Men Being Brutally Honest, 77 Base X, Craig, Antonio Feria, Omni Americana, Cameron 87, Deshaun Nolly, Brian Peaks, Michael Ross, Nelso, Apex Prowler, Kareen Henry, Dr. Rock, Julius Ferguson, B. Hillfire, Charles Hills, Mark Holt, Lee Ways, Jeffrey Speed, The Face, Mark Swift, Show Me, Black Dog, Odd Collard, Raphael Brown, Deanne, Donald Watts, Ryan Jackson, HipHop.catv, Coach DC, The Remedy, Kashif Caldwell, Ominous Black, I Am Black Man, Nichita, True King 337, Mr. Blue Collar, Barnolas, Kyle J. Sura, I'm Just Jules, Ab Media 83, Brian McMurray, TD Hip Hop Media, Drew Main, Artisan MC, Mr. Heat, Afro Analyst, Issa Abdul Zahir, Sir Anthony, MLR, Charles Rogers, Universal 178, Black Swerve 404, Rashid Barnes, Aaron Smith, DH, See Truth the Revelator, Gold Professor, Black Pill Ned Stark, Arthur Unknown, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Brian Williams, Kalon Jakala, Ricky Dawson, Cedric Bowman, True 7360, BK Born Shahi, James Washington, Hostile Adept, Seven Coast Dojo, W. Pure One, Roguish the Billmonger, BGS Ivmore, Marvin Battle Jr., and I can't forget Forrest Windu. Also on the Patreon side, Excalibur, Jason Warren, Soul Pen, Pursuer Prisoner, Taz, Kwaku 217, S. Haywood, Dragon 59, Supreme Ibmore, Adrian Hicks, Jay Bailey, Mr. Michi, Mo Mal, William Ruffin, and Asangwa. Thank you so much for being members of the Green Gorilla channel. I appreciate that, and you help me to keep things going. And, I've been missing in action for a little bit of time, but, that's all to the good. I had to take some time off to take care of some personal issues. But I want to ask a question today. Can feminism be reconciled with men's rights activism? And, for the most part, what I do is, thank you so much, BMO, for your kind donation. I appreciate that, brother. You deserve the highest honors for that. I appreciate that, my brother. I appreciate that. Appreciate that, sir. I don't know if you could hear that riff, but I'm assuming that you can. But anyway, so what I want to do, I like to read articles. And so what I intend to do is to read an article that I think accomplishes to some degree this goal. I don't know how successful the accomplishment of the goal is, but at least there's an individual who tries to do so. Okay. His name is Adam Jones, and he does work on genocide. And so what he does is he tries to reconcile feminism with men's rights activism. All right. So I'm going to read this article is short. I'm not going to be here all night tonight. Okay. So it is pretty decent article in the research of Adam Jones, not Alex Jones, but Adam Jones is interpolated into the work of Dr. Tommy Curry. And I think what he does is quite good. So, and he, explains the kind of issues that Black men have in a way that I think makes common sense, as opposed to the twisted narratives that we get from contemporary feminist discourse related to issues about gender. Because when you think about gender, you tend to think about women, or you tend to think about people who are members of the LGBTQ community, but you don't tend to think about men and the issues that they go through, particularly the issues related to Black men. So I'm just going to share the screen and get into this article, and then after that, I'll check your opinion about the matter, and then I'll conclude the session. All right. So let's do this like Brutus, because I always knew this. That's a Flavor Flavism. But anyway, so the title of this article, now it's relatively old. It was written in 2014. Okay. And it's written by individual by the name of Noah Berlatsky. And it's an interview with Adam Jones. And it's a short interview. It's a condensed interview. Okay. Might take 10 minutes to get through it, but ultimate, and it's published in the Atlantic, which is a pretty reputable blog site. So at any rate, the title of the article is "It's Not a Contradiction for Men to Discriminate Against Other Men." So a scholar of gender studies on reconciling feminism with the reality of gender bias against men. That's the title of the article in the subtitle. Okay. Now, I'm going to read this, and then after that, I'll go to a break again, and then I'll register your opinion on the matter by opening up the chat line, okay, or opening up the the StreamYard line. So anyway, the author Noah Berlatsky starts off by saying, and I'll expand this a little bit so it's a little bit bigger and it's more legible. He says, "I recently argued that the way the show Orange is the New Black deals with men," and I don't know if you've ever seen The Orange is the New Black. It's a television show about women locked up. Okay. So he recently argued that the way the show Orange is the New Black deals with men, and especially male prisoners, is problematic since the vast majority of prisoners in the US are men, not women, and black men overwhelmingly. We know this, right? And because the show uses stereotypical gender assumptions to elicit sympathy for women prisoners in ways uh, that don't translate into an institutional critique of prisons as a whole, my post became something of a viral hate read, with many critics complaining it was a prime example of "what about the men" rhetoric. That is, trying to bring up men as a way to prevent or derail engagement with oppression of women. But I mean, for crying out loud, it doesn't take a genius to see or to understand that men are incarcerated at elevated levels, whereas women typically tend to fly under the radar as it pertains to retributive justice. So there's women who are arguing for and advocating for equity and parity as it pertains to distributive justice, but you will never see, I doubt you will ever see women arguing, particularly feminists, arguing for parity as it pertains to retributive justice, which is justice related to punishment. I doubt you'll ever see that. But, I digress. So the author goes on to say, one of the main inspirations for my article was the work of Adam Jones. And you should acquaint yourself with Adam Jones. He has several videos on YouTube. Just look him up. Adam Jones, gender side or genocide. He does work on genocide, and he came up with a concept called gender side. But he's not the first person to come up with the concept, but he shapes and shifts it in order to make the case that quite often men who are considered to be outgroup men are subject to a great deal of violence and a great deal of oppression in various contexts. Okay, so anyway, so the inspiration for his article was the work of Adam Jones, who is a political scientist at the University of British Columbia. He's also the author of Gender Inclusive Essays on Violence, Men, and Feminist International Relations, and he's the executive director of Gendercide Watch, which is a website. Okay. Now, much of Jones' work broadly asks, what about the men? In that work, in that he works to show ways in which gendered violence and discrimination is used against men, whether in the U.S. incarceration system or in genocidal murders, such as those of battle-aged men in Kosovo. I talked to Jones about the relationship between feminism and his work on behalf of men. And the author goes on to just just let you know that the interview is condensed and it's edited. All right. So the author asked the question: you've identified yourself as a feminist writer. How do you square that with the fact that you often write about oppressions or violence targeted at men? Isn't one point of feminism to take attention away from men, where it is so often focused, and look at the less noticed ways in which women are oppressed or discriminated against? And many people talk about this. Dr. Tia Johnson talks about it. Dr. Tommy Curry talks about it, how feminists typically tend to argue that they are rendered invisible when issues about men are brought up, that somehow they're overlooked because males have privilege, even though we're discussing issues in which men are being killed, murdered, decimated. Doesn't matter, because we also have to give equal attention to women related to similar kinds of issues, even though Black men are incarcerated at much higher rates or subjected to extrajudicial killing by police officers and vigilantes at a much higher rate, that they are underemployed at a much higher rate, unemployed at a much higher rate relative to their white counterparts, the white male counterparts. Okay. That they, you know, oftentimes are corralled to prison from school through the school to prison pipeline. The list goes on. Okay. So at any rate, here is Adam Jones's answer. It's a fine line to walk sometimes. I define a feminist as someone who believes, one, that females have historically been discriminated against and persecuted on the basis of their gender, and two, that this should change in the direction of greater equality and protection. I'm also very much a global feminist, someone who has done a great deal of traveling in the global South. This is the West. This is North America. This is not the global South. Okay, so he's more interested, I would assume, in dealing with issues related to women in third world and second world countries. Okay, because a lot of women in America make a big fuss about how they're being oppressed and dominated, but they enjoy a quality of life that other people or elsewhere in the world do not enjoy. But that's digression. Okay, so anyway, um, he says, I'm very much a global feminist, someone who's done a great deal of traveling in the global South in particular. So my framing of gender issues tends to focus on societies where women and people in general are much less privileged than in the developed West. That's true for my engagement with men's issues as well. I'm critical of many variants of feminism for failing to recognize that gender selective atrocities happen to men and boys as well as women and girls. And I'm especially skeptical of the way that institutional gender programs and projects tend to focus exclusively on females, whether in the global North or South. So I got to give them some props for that. Okay. I think that's unfair and destructive. It offends my core liberal sensibilities. But without feminist critiques, we would barely have a notion of gender. And for what it's worth, the large majority of those who have supported me and cited my work over the years have been women who define themselves as feminists. I've never felt the urge to abandon the feminist label. Now that's him. Okay. I want to know what you think about it. All right. So then the author of the piece, the interviewer, uh, asked the question, why do you think it's useful to talk about discrimination against men? Aren't men generally the ones in power? So Jones's response is, it's long been recognized that gender can be trumped by, for example, social class. And this is something I try to mention as well. Gender can be trumped by class. And one of the examples I always bring up is, do you think that a wealthy white woman living in, so say, for example, the era in which slavery was at its apex, do you think that a wealthy white woman married to a plantation owner had less social capital than an indentured servant or a non-property owning white male? The very notion that she would have less influence and social capital is absolutely ridiculous. But these are the kind of things that we, have to accept with traditional idea, well, contemporary ideas about how patriarchy and male dominance works. It's as if all men have privilege, all women are underprivileged, and so all women are dominated. Doesn't matter what your class is, your race is, and so on and so forth. Okay, which I think is ridiculous. So he acknowledges, you know, historical accuracies related to how class can disrupt, this whole notion of gender discrimination. So anyway, he says discrimination against men traditionally tends to target poorer and more marginalized men who are seen as threatening, sound familiar, or hateful to the male dominant power structure. One of my arguments has been that we can disaggregate the class and gender components from each other, at least for analytical purposes, and recognize that a gender specific fear and hatred, misandry, is also operative. It's not a contradiction for men to discriminate against other men any more than women can also fear other women and police their gender roles and assist in keeping their sisters suppressed. And I would say the same goes for women oppressing men. You think white women weren't oppressing men during segregation and perhaps even now in various ways that we tend not to acknowledge and recognize, like the various Karens and Beckys who call the police just because we wandered into a space that they considered to be civilized while we brought the oogity boogity with us, the jungle. We could be bird watching. We could be barbecuing. We could be shopping. But, I digress. So, what about the much maligned white male? We should certainly recognize that it's been too easy for that group, talking about white men, to be targeted for contempt and defamation. Indeed, that there is no other identifiable ethnic and gender group that can be targeted in this way without arousing protest and outrage. Please. It's happening to us, even by some of our own women. But, I digress. White men often respond to that unfair and inaccurate critique with hostility and rejection of their own, a trend that is unfortunately marked in the so-called men's movement. My feeling is we can't expect our own concerns and causes to receive an empathetic hearing if we don't show empathy as well for women and feminism and recognize the justice of many of their criticisms and complaints. Now, if I had to respond to this, I would say, at the current moment, it just seems to me like feminism has accomplished its goal. But steps are being taken to further amplify and to even redefine the goal so that more benefits and boons can be ciphered over to them. But that's just my opinion. Okay. Then he goes on to say, we can likewise reasonably demand that people resist the easy contempt or the easy temptation to heap scorn and abuse on white men as a whole, or the men's movement based on the actions and convictions of a relatively small and unrepresentative sector of them. So, this is 2014. So the men's movement has been here for quite a bit of time. The manosphere has been here for quite a bit of time, whatever the case may be. All right. So then the interviewer asked the question, wouldn't it make sense to see discrimination against black men in the prison system as discrimination on the basis of race rather than on the basis of gender, which I think is a good question because, Dr. Tiasan Johnson talks about flat blackness as it pertains to racial discrimination against men. But when women have a specific kind of discrimination that they consider to be unique to themselves, then they get to talk about that ad nauseum. Okay. But when things are discriminatory against black males, it's a flat black racial thing. It has nothing to do with gender at all. Okay. So anyway, the interviewee, Adam Jones, responds, if it were purely racism, you'd see as many black women in prison as black men. Thank you, sir. Amen. There's always been a tradition in the US of demonizing the black, and then he goes on to say, or Latino or Chinese or Jewish male, and depicting him as violent, rebellious, stupid, incompetent, lazy, sexually predatory, and so on. When you see how the gender variable operates in that case, you can easily apply it in other circumstances. Men in general tend to be the ones depicted, not least by other men, as more violent, incompetent, predatory, and the like. It's a little like feminists dissecting the latest campaign against welfare mothers and pointing to the underlying misogyny as well as the class-based fear and hatred. So in other words, yes, men can demonize and discriminate against other men. Yes. And yes, there is a gender component related to racial discrimination that often doesn't get talked about because we can't perceive men as actually having a gender. There's only privilege there. So the interviewer asked the question. Part of the story behind the idea of misogyny is the argument that society systematically portrays women and femininity as weak or lesser or worthless or evil. I don't know about this. I mean, but hey, women are pedestalized as far as I'm concerned and lionized for being perceived as more morally virtuous than men. But that's just my viewpoint. So I don't think that's totally accurate. But I mean, in some instances, it is the case that physically women generally tend to be weaker than men. I wouldn't say they're lesser, they have a different function than men. But here comes the levelizing. We got to make sure that everybody is equivalent. There is no supplementary or complementariness. It's just everybody jockeying and aiming to be level. But, I digress. Wouldn't it make more sense to say that certain minority masculinities are demonized rather than saying masculinity is hated in itself? And so Jones responds, you find when you look through the history of gender roles and representations that certain female and male paradigms have been highlighted and idealized. Women have been placed on a pedestal, yes, for their maternal force or their spirituality or their physical beauty, and occasionally for their intellect or leadership skills. But few would deny that this goes hand in hand with the misogynist targeting of women who don't fit and don't want to fit that restrictive ideal, and with more essentialist conceptions of women as evil and in league with dark powers, as manipulative and as sexually voracious, and so on. Okay. All right. Much the same can be said of misandry. In many respects, it's provoked by men who fail to subscribe to the ideal of the strong, power exercising heterosexual male. Now, I don't know how. I'm seeing this spin that he's going into, and it seems like he is very much inculcated by feminist ideology. But I digress. But there's also a more elemental stereotype of men in general as particularly brutish, insensitive, dangerous, dirty, repulsive. I'm especially interested in those more base and instinctive aversions and how they get mapped onto men in general and minority or third world men in particular. And this is the important piece, because all of the negative attributes of masculinity typically get lumped on men who are outgroup males, or what he would consider to be, and we'll see this, battle-aged men. Okay. So, for example, you see a lot of those anti-male stereotypes being roped into dominant cultures' depictions of outgroup men who are targeted for genocide and other forms of mass violence. Think about how the Jewish male was depicted in Nazi propaganda, and how only Jewish men, not women, were depicted and demonized for those purposes. That went hand in hand with Nazi men's conviction of themselves as uniquely strong, pure, clean, heroic, and so on. So this is why, it's important to understand that when you talk about all of the pathology of masculinity being lumped and heaped onto the backs of outgroup men, then you can see that there's an issue. So white men become strong, hardworking, decent, responsible, and then you get other kinds of men who are lazy, immoral, rude, dirty, dangerous, rapists, abusers, and so on. And this is especially the case for black men. All right. So he says, the interviewer does, how do you see your working relationship to the men's rights movement? And then he goes on to say, the interviewee, I have an ambivalent relationship with men's rights activists, but I suppose I have one with feminists as well. In both cases, I reject the kind of casual and offhandedly negative generalizations that are often made about the other gender. I dislike the sense I often get that these men and women are generalizing from their personal experiences and resentments. I ask advocates on both sides to really interrogate their assumptions and prejudices, and to bend over backward to be as generous and empathetic as possible, whether towards feminist movements that represent one of the greatest emancipatory currents of the last few centuries, or toward men who are currently trying to articulate their own gender concerns and rights-based grievances. I do believe it's legitimate for men collectively, including men in privileged societies, to protest the way they are frequently demonized in block as violent and predatory power mongers, and the way their interests and needs are often frozen out of the discussion of gender issues. And the interviewer goes on to say, and this is almost over. Okay, I guess what I find problematic in the way men's rights issues can be framed in terms of losing out to feminists. There seems to be an idea that as women's rights advance, men will lose out or be marginalized. Is that zero sum logic wrong? And then not the author, but Adam Jones says it depends. A discussion of women's gender rights can quite naturally lead into a discussion of the ways that men also experience discrimination and defamation, including the institutional variety. But sometimes men do receive a message that this is a zero-sum game. Like, you can't have a my brother's keepers program, because it's going to take away from black women and girls. You can't have a highlighting of men being subjected to extrajudicial police killing or even mass incarceration because it's taken away from girls or black women and girls. Okay? So the vastly complex issues like violence, family rights, cultural representations, and so on tend to have a meaningful and actionable gender dimension only insofar as they concern women and girls. In theory and often in practice, advancing women's rights shouldn't mean freezing out men or vilifying them as a group. But frequently, at the levels of both discourse and policy, it does. And this is why I have to applaud him here. At least he's bringing up the issue that, yeah, sometimes this is seeming to be a zero-sum game related to family courts, related to all kinds of institutions and opportunities, right? So at any rate, he says, look, in domestic violence, right? And I talked about the media and how we're, projected and caricaturized versus black women. But at any rate, he goes on to say, but frequently at the levels of both discourse and policy, it does seem to be a zero-sum game. That should be confronted and rejected, in my view. But it should be done in a way that acknowledges the legitimacy and necessity of many pro-female perspectives and campaigns. So that's the end of the article, man. I just want to know what you think about it. I want to know what you feel about it. I'm going to take a quick break and I'm going to come back and see what you have to say if you have anything to say at all. But this shouldn't take long. I'm not going to be on here 2 hours a day. I promise you. About to get in and get out. So I'll take a quick break and then I'll leave the invite in the chat. And if you want to comment, you can. Be right back. All right, I'm back. I just wanted to know if you had any input or if you had anything to say about this topic at all. You wanted to ask a question. Do you agree or do you disagree? Is it possible for feminism to be reconciled with issues related to men's rights? Or is it fundamentally the case that feminism is an impediment for men being able to advance their own issues and their own experiences with discrimination and oppression? What up, bruh? How you doing there?
Woo! How you feeling? Just came from
Good.
a checkup. Oh man, that topic is very spot on, and this is one of the primary reasons why Cerulean Gray and myself came up with the Gray Faulkner Initiative. You start seeing the results of what happened when you don't invest in your young boys and men for generations. We look at women as a protected class. I'm not saying you shouldn't protect women, but when you don't elevate your boys the same way you elevate your girls, your community becomes stagnant. You're giving women so many rights that, let's say they want to marry, there's a reason why they can't find a guy on their level. There are none. You haven't groomed them.
Right.
And then you start to see this disrespect or disdain of men because they're going to look at them and say, well, I got it. Why can't you? You don't see what I got to deal with?
Right.
I start to think, even in law enforcement, I had this conversation with black female officers. Why can't these guys work? I said, look up all the business districts. They're only hiring women. And you're giving the men the shit jobs.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Professor.
No, man, I just think that, the extent to which women continuously complain about how they're locked out and how they need development and how they need resources, even when it's the case that black men are suffering and black boys are suffering. And, at some point there has to be a trade-off. You claim that you want a certain kind and caliber of man, but you're not willing to invest into the youth, the young males, so that they can become the kind of men that you actually desire. Many of these problems would evaporate that we have if you would take time to see that this is not just an individual or specific or particularistic goal just to elevate yourself, but to to elevate the entirety of your community. But at the current moment, they're just preoccupied with themselves. And that's the issue that I think we're having. The issue is, like, you can say what you want to about Umar Johnson, but at least he's trying to establish a school for black boys.
Mm-hmm.
Just straight black boys. So, I mean, he can say some deprecating things about the manosphere or whatever. I think he's wrong. I think he's uninformed about, what's happening to black men. And because a lot of times black men are suffering at the hands of black women because black women are utilizing systems that dominate and oppress us to their own advantage. And this is this is the primary, I think this is the primary reason why black men in the manosphere are talking back to black women and are letting them know you are complicit with this system that is pressing us.
You're the accomplice to our destruction. And see, the one thing I don't give him leeway with is because he's a clinical school psychologist, and you see what happens to these young boys at the hands of their mothers. We're not talking about the police. We're not talking about white men, white teachers. We're talking about their mothers. You stifle them when they come out the womb. You refuse to read. You refuse to invest. You refuse to teach. You refuse to even make vocabulary cards. And so he knows. He wouldn't get paid. He wouldn't even need a PhD in his field without it. And
See, this is,
what happens is, and what happens is this. A lot of people hate to be the accomplice because the accomplice gets the same amount of time as the person who actually commits the crime. And they don't want to, and they want to be alleviated of that fate. And see, this is the problem that I had when people came onto my channel. Like last night, I had a video that says, "Are you willing to get out the men's way to save you and the community?" And I invited women, I invited men, and I said, "Are you willing to get out the way?"
And what was the response?
No women came up. I mean, the men came up and we had dialogue, but the craziness about it is this. When you're more concerned about hair, Goldman Sachs is giving you $10 billion. You literally spend $10 billion a year just with your hair alone. So I don't want to talk about we don't have the money, we don't have the resources. You waste them. You waste them on endeavors that will bury us another 150 years.
I hear you, brother. I want to know what Don 5000 Watts has to say about this, man. I'm just presenting the information. I'm not taking a stance at this moment. I mean, I am taking a stance because I believe that this has been made to be a zero-sum game. That if men get attention, it's not us who are perceiving this as a zero-sum game. It's them. I'm saying it's the feminists that are doing this. That's my opinion. And whether the feminists be black male, whether it be a black woman, whether it be a LGBTQ woman, it doesn't matter to me. They're perceiving this as a zero-sum game. If black men get something, that's taking away something from black women and girls. And at some point, you have to see our fates as interconnected. Black women give birth to black boys who are eventually going to become, provided that they live, they're going to become black men. So what do you want them to be? Are you going to invest in their futures? Or are you going to, allow the system to continue to play out its function and to keep them or to prevent them from being the best that they can possibly be? That's the issue. Okay, Don Watts, are you there, bro?
Yeah, I'm here. I was just, waiting for my spot. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, bro. Go ahead.
Okay, so going to the original question, do I think feminism can be reconciled with advocacy? Now, I'm just a regular dude, and I kind of asked it. I've been listening, but I kind of missed this one part. Are we talking about reconciling it with the women who agree with them or the actual feminists? And in both situations, I don't think so, because just at my level, as a regular dude, you have a lot of people, a lot of women that buy into this ideology that they don't completely understand. So, and the ones that are now just now starting to get it are the ones who have boys, and they starting to see like, wait a minute, why aren't they including anything for my son? You know?
Yeah, I get that. I get that. But here's the deal. You've always seen black men, to some degree or another, interpolate black women into their social movements, especially as it pertains to race. We got this disconnect with the advent of second wave feminism. Prior to this disconnect and second wave feminism, we moved, even if it was a contentious movement, together, we still moved as a unit. But now we're not moving as a unit. And the perfect example, Ice Cube, right? I mean, this Black Lives Matter. We're not moving as a unit. Okay. So, my issue is, you are basically saying that we're privileged, but you're not using a thoroughgoing and a pretty, accurate heuristic in order to bear out or flesh out what actually is occurring. They're barbed and twisted by ideology, and that's the issue. I mean, and so I think that a lot of their positions give rise to misandry, and I don't know how to get out of this trap. We just got to keep talking. We got to keep saying what we have to say, and there are going to be people who are going to resist against it because they want to pedestalize, and they don't want women to be held accountable for some of the ignorant stuff that they do. But I mean, and this is the issue I have. So I was looking at that interview with Umar Johnson and Mark Lamont Hill, right? And Umar's issue is, okay, well, it's not black men or black women who are at fault, it's white supremacy. But at some point we got to say, look, if white women are utilizing institutions that are innately oppressive to black men, then they are participating in white supremacy. They're using it to prevent us from being able to rise and ascend. And they're doing some of the same things that they claim that we're doing to them. They do it to us. So as it pertains to domestic violence, they're just as likely, if not more likely, to assault us. But they don't want to have any natural consequences.
I'll give you this, GG. Do you know how many times they feel vindicated when I show up and I end up having to arrest them because they're the aggressor? It's almost a shock. Like, how dare you arrest me? I'm just perfect will of God. And when you actually get through this whole notion, number one, a lot of people don't want to hold them accountable. It's because they're either trying to screw them or get paid by them, or both. Number two, I never seen such a self-indulgent creature in my life, where the point that you don't even give a damn about what you birth. We're not talking about the men you're sleeping with, but what you birth. You will let them go by the wayside. You will let him. I mean, you're a professor, so is Dr. T and Art New Style. How many times have I worked in the school system as a coach? Mothers will say to their sons, well, he just need to get a job. College may be too hard. He doesn't need to go to the military. It's too dangerous. But you're raising a boy in the projects. And they tell the girls, you need to go get an education. You galvanize them. You stifle and neuter your boys. And it's crazy because when you look at all the research, and BGS once put it out there, that white women raise better black sons than black mothers. And I'm looking at it from my standpoint of my father and my mother. Like, hell, you're gonna fail. You represent me, nigga.
Exactly.
And that's what they would say. You're not given an option to fail. You're just gonna have to try harder, try again. You're gonna have to. It's like getting your ass kicked by the school bully. Eventually, you're gonna win one. And I see this. And I see this. How can I say it? This bastardization of oppression. How are you oppressed when you can walk up openly in defiance against your so-called oppressor?
You know what? You know what? I'd like to chime in on what Charles has said. Peace and salute to the panel, Dr. Gigi. I think that when Goldman Sachs, pledged that $10 billion, but they are.
Yeah, you're cracking up, man. Yeah, you're.
Am I cracking up?
You sound good now.
Oh. Am I okay now?
You're good now. You're good now.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, I think that $10 million handout that it should have been attached to that.
Okay, you're Borging again. You're Borging again.
Am I Borging again?
Yeah, so you might have to speak up louder or something like that. It might be that you're not speaking loud enough into the mic. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. How about now? Is that better?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. What I'm saying is this: is that the women should be coerced into promoting their children's education, both the females and the males, and that's the only way to get that money. In other words, you have to make sure that you set a priority for your children to be educated, especially your boys, because they're far behind the girls in academic acumen, which means they're going to be far less productive in the work market. Okay, whatever they try to do, even if they try to start their own businesses. Okay, STEM is the way, because technology is going to rule the market, the service sector. That's what's happening. And the boys need to be able to do that, because the boys can't become husbands and fathers if they choose to do so, if they cannot provide for their families to begin with. So you gotta promote it for them when they're children. And the only way I see that you can do that is when you give up big time money, like $10 billion, okay, and you spread it out amongst these women. You say, hey, listen, all you women who have children and you're single mothers, you better be promoting the education of your children. First priority. Otherwise, you don't get the money.
Yeah, this is a mess, man. I don't know how to untangle. It's like trying to untangle string. I don't know how to straighten out this yarn. I really don't, because on the one hand, right now you have women who they have no shame about being single mothers, even though they know that being a single mother, especially one who's poor, creates a great deal of stress and strain on her progeny. These women have become comfortable with not having men involved in their lives. I mean, they and a lot of some of these men's are deadbeats, and they don't want to step up to the plate. But a great portion of these men actually want to be with these women, but the women, want to be in control, and they know that they have control, and so they end up manipulating these men with the system.
Mm-hmm. With power comes responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. Coerce the women into it. Say, listen, if you're not going to allow the fathers of these children to be with you, okay, to provide balance and stability, you better provide a stable educational environment for your children, full stop. That's it. Or they're in danger of losing their children because they're not doing anything for the children. The children are suffering anyhow.
Yeah, but who's going to coerce them? Like, what institution will coerce them?
See, we're going to have to go.
This is the reason why.
See, this is the reason why, even in the Great Faulkner Initiative, we talk about getting to positions of power. If you're in the military fire department, STEM, police, teaching, you be coming to the middle class, correct?
To some degree, yeah.
So the middle class is usually the people buying the houses and actually buying up infrastructure within the city, correct?
Right.
So if you piss off your middle class in a city, you're going to have a whole voting block on your ass. So, like in Baltimore, I'm over here by Lake Montebello. Jesus Christ, look at the sights. But anyway, it's right down the street from Morgan State. This is called the Northeast District by police wise. This is the largest group of homeowners in the city. Guess what you don't see? You don't see anybody on the corners. You don't see trash on the ground. This is pristinely kept because they have speed dials to City Hall because they built themselves up into such a way. This is the reason why you're going to have to force your government systems have, both local, state, and federal. When you're just a bunch of people wandering about with no consolidation of power, nobody's going to listen to you. But let's say if you get like 1,000, 2,000 brothers who are firefighters or police, you got some power in your hand. Especially if they're greatly invested homeowners within the city.
Yeah, this.
Hey, go ahead.
No, this is a mess, man. We've disinvested in black men because we've emphasized the woes and the issues related to black women, and so black men's issues don't get discussed, or they don't get equal time. But this is just part of the plan anyway, because black men are members of an out group, and so they're targeted by everyone. And now, it just seems almost like betrayal for black women, to articulate the same kind of viewpoint of black men as our oppressors do. This is what I take pause and issue with. All right. But how do we get out of this?
You're gonna have to start a plan of you have no allies but your own.
Yeah.
You're really gonna have to look at it. If you look at it militaristically, they're not your allies. They're actually seditious traitors.
Yeah.
I hate to say that about our women, but we may have to start looking at them as that.
That's
Not
a deep
all.
one, man. I mean, that's deep.
But that's what they are. I mean, these children of single parent mothers, they're suffering. You got boys reading, they're getting warehoused through the public education system. Okay, they're 3 grades behind at least. These are the boys. Okay, these are the ones who are going to be building infrastructure. If there's any gentrification done, guess who's going to be doing the hard labor? These boys, when they grow up to be young men, that's going to be their livelihood.
But so look, it's deep to say that black women are traitors, man.
It's hard I
don't want to believe that, because I believe there's still some good black women out here.
I'm not saying all, but it's hard to believe that majority of them are not. And I'm just looking at it. I'm taking my heart and I'm putting it in the back of my trunk right now. And I'm just using my mind and common sense and logic. And I'm saying, you're not even pushing. Like, I had to say this many times on my channel. You're not even, screw the guys that you're dating, sleeping with, or I'm talking about your sons. The boys you birth. And you can give 3 damns about them. But some white lady adopts your kid, and this kid is an overachiever. How the hell did that happen?
Well,
you know how.
She gives a damn like a mother should. That's the only difference. It ain't got a damn thing to do with the mass or race. It has to do with your priorities and your values and how you project them onto your children.
And I can't say it any better than what Eric said, Mr. Ingram said. Because I'm just looking at it from a standpoint of view. you're no different than somebody giving poison to their children. Like, it breaks my fucking heart to say this.
Mm.
And this is a person who has to go into the homes and had to talk to women because the ex-husband or the child's father want to see their kid. No, they said they gave me custody. But you see, all the psychotropic drugs, all the stress relieving drugs she's taking, but her teenage daughter wants her daddy. Her 12, 13-year-old daughter wants daddy. And I had to tell this lady, yo, you're going to be a grandparent in a year if she does not get her father's love, because she's going to find it somewhere else. You got kids out there, the boys, who barely can read on first grade level and even in a fifth grade. And it's a damn shame that it takes brothers who are not even biologically connected to these boys to give more of a damn to the person they came out of. It makes you think. There's a license to carry a gun. There's a license and a certification to be a cop, firefighter, military, whatever. A license to fly a plane, to drive a car, to steer a boat. But when are we going to take everything else as seriously as parents?
Yeah, so this is what I'll say. So the article was about reconciling feminism and the concerns of women with the concerns of men. But we're a minority group. We're not the dominant group of men, okay? And, again, I said this the other day. I'll say it now. I know BGS said it. Some other men in the manosphere have said it. When white men have a cold, black men have the flu. So if there's something amiss in the family court system, black men are going to have a more difficult time dealing with that issue than are white men. And increasingly, black men are being kept away from their kids. And the kids are used as bargaining chips. When black women do this, it's egregious. It's ridiculous. And it is, to me, it's traitorous, because those kids are not just your kids. They're the man's kids as well. But I've experienced this as well in my life, with the mother of my first child, just was ignorant. You don't have to see her. Any little thing would just piss her off, and then she would prevent me from being able to interact with the child, which I was more than willing to do. Okay. And but these are how these things occur. These are how these things happen. Okay. But we're not talking about the poor and the bad behavior of women. We're just talking about this, this abstract form of oppression that women suffer from. And so it's difficult for men, especially black men, to be able to reconcile feminism with their own experiences, especially when they know that black women are using the very same systems that are oppressive towards us against us.
And very willingly.
Yeah, this is what black men are having a big fat issue with.
May I interject for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Ayo. Go ahead.
I somewhat kind of figured this out a little bit in my mind. When they accepted feminism and the gynocracy, that automatically meant they had to turn their back on the boys, because in turn they were going to automatically turn their back on the men. So, I mean, we're doing all this pandering and crying and wondering why won't they just do right by the boys at least? That gynocracy and that feminism flag that the white woman and the black woman come themselves merging together to align with, it's a mess. It's just a total mess. And I don't see no resolution, because they don't care about these boys. They've been knowing for 4+ decades that these boys are at a 4th grade or lower reading level. They don't care. They have never cared. They care about their hair, their nails, how they look in society, and what's the next man they can jump to? From next man to next man to next man. That's it. That's just my thoughts, though.
Yeah, my issue has always been, black men need to have a voice. And we have a unique voice because we know things that they don't know. Or we see things from a different perspective and a different angle than the way black women, white women, and white men would see things. All right. We have a different kind of experience in America than any other group of people, just based on its history. All right. And now, it just seems like I don't know what to do to right the ship other than to keep talking. But there are men like Mark Lamont Hill and Umar Johnson who are basically arguing that, we don't need to be critical of the women. We need to be more critical of the men. And so it's the sign language again. It's the shaming, the guilting, the insulting, and the need to pathologize black men. And I've always
Green Gorilla, please never forget the cohorting of lesser type of men that go along with their plan to shame men like us who are trying to make these changes. Never forget about those men because they're cohorts too.
Oh yes, and I'd like to say something real quick, Dr. Gorilla. Look, when I hear people like that, they're in the same box as the women. You're traitors. And I've spoke to Umar several times, and I said, "Look, bro, you can't kiss these women. I don't know. I understand you trying to make a buck. You trying to kiss these women's asses, but guess what? That's the only thing they're gonna give you to kiss is their ass. No lips, just straight ass. You know damn well as a school psychologist that they're the reasons why you have a career. If there were fathers in the home, there would be no need for Umar. There would be no need for your position. Half of these diagnoses that come out because, one, you have a white female teacher who's afraid of a 7-year-old boy. 7. There's no difference in her eyes than a grown 6'5", 275-pound black man than a 7-year-old boy. You already got to deal with prejudice against the system just because of the color of his skin and the fact that he has a penis. What we need to address is really address the facts of the issues that people like a Umar can't help but to speak about. It's not about talk. Guess what? As a man, you can't worry about feelings. You have to deal with facts. When it comes to the degradation of your fucking community or your fucking society, fuck your feelings. We'll worry about your feelings when we have time to. We don't. You wanna have a prayer circle? See, what you need to do is actually tell them, why did you get pregnant before you got married? Why didn't you look for the best possible man to be the father of your children?
Charles, they doing it because they running the old playbook that's been set up for them to do this. They've been passed down information between grandmothers, mothers, aunts, nieces. They know how to play this game better than we do. I was talking about this earlier on the Roger Report, Green Gorilla. This thing that they're doing, it ain't got shit to do with feelings. They masking it with it. They tell us they lie. This shit is about contracts, and they try to get every man they can to enter into a contract with them. So if you break that contract, written or unwritten, because in their mind they believe we can read minds. If you break that contract, you ass out. And everybody knows in this country, after a certain time, it went from being where if the male size a child, the child belongs to the man. No longer is it like that. If you fuck up that contract in her mind any kind of way, Green Gorilla, Charles, and Eric, that means she has the right to wreak hell on you to the end of infamy and beyond. She don't care. This is that tried true game plan. And everybody trying to figure out how can we communicate with them, how can we this, how can we that. Fuck that. We need to start teaching these black men about the contract. Don't sign the contract. Everything on your terms, never sign the contract. Marriage is for her, not for the male. You can go sign your seed and create your lineage without the contract.
Yeah, I get I understand exactly where A.L. Evans is coming from, man. I know through experience it's not easy dealing with a tyrant, man. And these women have become tyrants, bro. I'm just keeping it 100,
Yes.
man. I've seen it, and they use the system to be tyrannical.
Yeah, and sometimes the Green Gorilla. My wrestling coach told me one time before.
Somebody got that. Somebody need to turn their YouTube off.
So, my wrestling coach told me one time before. Sometimes the greatest reversal is never to get in the move in the first place. When you have a mass exodus away from these women, and you put your foot down, then we're not going to tolerate that bullshit anymore. It's either die alone or you fix your shit.
But here's why I think that won't work. I'm just gonna be honest, because men are just always gonna want to chase women. There's gonna be men who are gonna look for validation from women all across the board. You're gonna have men. Now I would suggest to men, man, like, look, don't lose your purpose. Stay on your task, fulfill your goals. And if a woman doesn't fit into it because she's being obstinate and being difficult, leave her alone, okay? But you got a whole host of men who, they will take it. I myself have taken,
and you know what it is, Green Gorilla? You know what it is? So Roger said it earlier, and it was like an epiphany when he said it, when I heard it. Black men do not know how to take pussy off the table as far as negotiations go. All right. We do not want to give them the raw bit of truth that we know that they need, because in the back of our mind, we feel like if we do this, we might be taking some form of pussy off the table, whether it's 5, whether it's a 10 to a 3. We constantly trying to keep pussy on that negotiating table. And that's what we fought ourselves. We must own that shit. Real talk.
Yeah. So look, I got a brother by the name of Clark. And, I think he is, owed an answer to this question. He says, have white feminists turned their back on their sons? And, it all depends on which feminists you're talking about. But some of them have literally turned their backs on their sons. At one point, there were a group of radical feminists who basically said, we're going to divest ourselves from all men. And so they formed these communes. And they took their daughters with them. They divorced their husbands or left their husbands, separated themselves from their husbands, and lived on these communes. And, of course, the communes failed. I mean, after a certain period of time, these women came to the realization that this doesn't work, because women are assholes too. Because they're people. The same.
And not only are they assholes, Green Gorilla, they can't build. They can't build.
I'm not gonna go so far as to say they can't. Maybe they won't. But because of the roles or whatever the case may be. But here's the deal. So they formed these communes. A lot of these women abandoned and neglected their sons. And some of these women, though, feel as if they're actually helping their sons to become better people by having their sons become toady. And that means, like, genuflecting or bowing down or agreeing that there's something innately wrong with them and that they need to be indoctrinated into being more sensitive related to women's needs and how hard women have it in the world. But, at some point, and thank you, Ray Knows. I appreciate your donation, man. At some point, black men are going to have to say, And it's happening though, because men have been having these crazy experiences with black women for the last 40, 50 years, bro. Okay? The fracturing the families, you know, the interactions with DV and the police. You know, now it's taken over, you know, into the world of activism and to professionalism. It's like everywhere you look and you turn, black men are dealing with these unruly and non-cooperative women. And look, I don't have a problem or an issue with women being able to engage in the professions and to improve themselves and to, you know, for the most part, enter into what they consider to be equality. But at the same time, while you're doing that, you got a whole host of systems that you utilize that are unfair to us. And you're blocking us. And so, you know, at some point, man, these women, either they're gonna have to be ignored, like you said, you got to take it off the table. Just leave them alone. But my best advice for a young man: don't get involved with a young lady, man, while you're trying to figure out what it is that you're trying to do with your life, bro. Because it'll be a distraction for you, bro. Go ahead.
I have to honestly ask you a question. You don't believe in your heart if we said no to the contract, any forms of contract with them, that would literally actually make them want to have to change that? I mean, by saying we're saying no to the contract is by us saying we're voting with our feet and we are turning our back on every form of misandry that you have been presenting for the last 6+ decades since you picked up Miss Sarah's mantle. Period, point blank. You don't think it would work?
I think it could work, but only temporarily. I'm gonna tell you why. Somebody gonna need to turn the YouTube on. Somebody's okay. Don Watson trying to get back. Here's why I think it's only a temporary fix. Because they still have institutional power on their side. They still have policy on their side. They still have the family court on their side. So until those things are fixed, even if we pull away, it'll just be, oh, they could just fake it. They could just say, oh, well, okay, well, come on back. But in the back of their mind, they still know that they have weapons of mass destruction that they can use in order to throw your life awry and to throw you off your course. This is why when their biggest fear is that men institutionally will take away those safeguards which empower them. So like, say, for example, a woman is going to expect that when she calls the police during a DV situation, that the cop is automatically going to lock the man up. But when Charles Faulkner arrives on the scene, and if it's the case that the man is just wailing and being primarily aggressive to the woman, I'm pretty sure he's going to arrest the man. But if that woman is holding a knife in her hand and the man is cut up, I'm pretty sure she's going to jail. But there are not enough men. This is a man issue, but it's also an institutional issue. And I do think that men need to, look after themselves, be independent, exhibit agency on their own, and to pull back and to withdraw. But pulling back and withdrawing is only going to take us so far, because they still have these weapons of mass destruction. They still got the family court. They still have the power, of popular opinion that they could use related to DV. Even though everything we know about DV or everything in the popular culture or the media that's presented about it is wrong. This is why I got upset when I watched that video with Mark Lamont Hill and Umar Johnson. And at least Umar has a more, I would say, at least he understands the racial component in all of this. Okay. But this Mark Lamont Hill guy, this guy is a fucking professor at a university, and he's talking about these issues. There's no way in the world that a person who is a PhD and is working in the field of academia should not have access to over the 40 to 50 decades of research about domestic violence and sexual assault. There's no way that he should not know that men are just as likely to be victims of these kind of crimes as women, and that you can't use these kinds of arguments in order to besmirch the reputation of black men writ large. But he's towing the ideological line. I don't know if he's doing it because it gains him a certain sort of cultural cachet in the academy or in the media. Who knows? I can't know the inward springs of somebody else's beliefs. I don't know. Or their actions. I don't know. But I do know it could just be that this is what this man has been indoctrinated into. And he's a blue pill guy and he needs to be awakened from his, his slumber. I don't know until I talk to that individual and present him, with the facts. But at least the conversation is occurring and it's beginning to happen. But I don't like the attack against the manosphere, because the manosphere is being characterized as inherently misogynistic. But the reality of the situation is men have a whole bunch of deep-seated issues, a lot. And nobody is actually paying attention to our issues in the way that they should. Now, the manosphere is beginning to grow legs. It's expanding. The viewpoint is bubbling. But it shouldn't just bubble with one individual, and one individual shouldn't just be attacked. The men's rights movement has moved into the black community. Okay? It's not going anywhere. This shit ain't going anywhere. And until we get heard and until our viewpoints are validated, this space is not going anywhere, and the arguments they're not going anywhere. The positions are not going anywhere. Black men, especially, in this culture, I mean, dude, incarceration off the chain, homicide off the chain, education and our failure to matriculate into employment the way we should off the chain. And then we got black women breathing down our necks telling us we're rapists, sexist abusers, and misogynists, and we're the white people of black people. This shit, bruh, is unbelievable that we're here at this point, but here we are. We are here. And the question is, what's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, what's going to be the natural evolution out of all of this? We can pull away as much as we want, but as long as they got this institutional power, man, I don't know what to do. I say leave them alone, because you can have the greatest woman in the world, the best. She can be the most cooperative, sweet, compliant woman in the world. She's just cooperative. She understands what family is about, the whole nine. As soon as she decides, I don't want to cooperate anymore for any whimsy whatsoever, she can pull away and fuck your whole life up. This is the issue that black men are having. So, I get it. At this point, I would encourage young men, man, just leave these. I would encourage them, go on your own, man. Leave them alone. Do you work on yourself? If you do want to take that chance, here are the risks. At least now we're exposing men to the risks. I didn't have that advantage as a young man. An entire culture of men explaining to you the risks associated in dealing with contemporary women, whatever race they may happen to be. But these women have the sword of Damocles hanging over our head, man. They could use institutional power to damage us and to throw us off at any step of the game. And again, I think you're right. I do think you're right. What about your sons, man? What about your brothers? What about your fathers? What about your uncles? What about your cousins? Do you give a shit about them? Or do you care about what's good for women as a whole or a class? This shit is unnatural. It's crazy to me, man. But I've been speaking too long, man. I'm gonna give y'all closing remarks, and then I'm about to get out of here, and then I'll come on here tomorrow and have a conversation about something altogether different, bro. So, Charles, man, go ahead and give your conclusory remarks.
Well, once again, Doctor, it's always a pleasure to always have some dialogue with you.
I'm just gonna say this for the young men. You have no allies with the older men trying to school you. Do not make the mistakes of the past because you damn sure will actually be doomed to repeat it. What you need to do is take a key factor what they're doing correctly. Worry about them and only them. Take a page out of their book and do it your damn self. Be the best version of you that you could be in your life. Females will be here and females will be there. But you got to worry about putting yourself in a position of power. Woo! And I'm out.
Woo, bruh. Holla at you. Eric Ingram, conclusory remarks, man. Okay. Don Watts, conclusory remarks. Okay. You got anything to say before you dive out?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, Don. Close out. We're about to close out, man. Last thoughts.
Okay, so I wanted to make a quick comment about something you mentioned about people need to focus on their purpose. I just want to say, as just a regular dude who's trying to help out, the boys, whoever who are around me in any way I can. What I'm starting to see, especially in these single mother households, is they don't have purpose, and like they don't understand why it's necessary. So I would have to say, like, I can't really see a solution in sight. The only thing that I can see is like, or say, is that as men, we might have to stand and just try to do what we can to help our own, to coach them up so they can have, like, the Charles Barkley, so mad at GG, or one that can get us get the change that you guys are fighting for. But I don't know, this is looking like a hopeless fight for me. That's all I got to say.
All right, brother. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for joining me this evening. Appreciate that. AL, you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
Can you give me some conclusory remarks, man?
I've been sitting back and I've been thinking and I've been pondering. And BGS is right, Charles is right, you right, Dr. TSR Charles is right. But moreover, if these women really want to see some change and try some change, I know of 2 black men who wrote an initiative, and then a 3rd black man. The first 2 is the Great Faulkner Initiative, and then Angry Man wrote a set of standards that black men should be walking by also. If the black men would just put some of these practices in perspective and in practice, and these women just literally take a look at the Great Faulkner Initiative and literally give it a thought, and not only a thought, try to put it to action, you will see some change in less than 9 months. I promise you. But guess what? You know how we are, Green Gorilla. That sounds like too much like hard work, right? Don't it?
Man, unfortunately so, man. But we all we got. We all we got.
I know, bro. Hey, but guess what? I appreciate everything you do, bro. And keep doing what you're doing and keep re-indoctrinating these dudes, man. So that way they can start re-indoctrinating these women, and maybe we can re-indoctrinate our community. Just maybe. So don't stop, bro. Don't get tired. Don't stop. When you feel like you get tired, trust me. It's dudes like me out there, bro. We're going to keep giving you your roses while you live.
Appreciate that, man. Much appreciation for that, man. Because sometimes I do get weary of this, especially when all the chicanery and all the disrespect comes to a bubble. over differences of opinion. So,
But we gonna rise above that, bro. Every time we gonna rise above that because we function on logic, ration, and reason. That's what makes us man. That's what makes us man.
well, I appreciate your support, brother, and I appreciate your encouragement even more. So, peace out, my brother. I'll holler at you until next time, man.
That's what's up, bro. Peace.
Peace. To my brother
Hey,
Eric, man, some
hey.
closing remarks.
Yeah, Gigi.
And I want to give a
listen.
shout out to Doc Johnson, man, before I forget to do that.
Okay.
Shout out to Doc.
I from what I hear, I'm taking the extreme view. I mean, I'm thinking if young black men see what the situation is, and seeing what the situation is of our children, the boys and the girls, I like this way. Make that monk for a little bit, so that way they focus on themselves and the children and leave the women to themselves. The women are adults; they know what they're doing. Leave them alone, okay? But the children cannot be left alone; they can't be neglected, okay? That means that the men have to take the role. They have to do it. They have to take the charge. And the women, with all this money they're getting, again, I say they should be somehow coerced into along with receiving that money. Before they receive it, they have to promote the education of their children. I don't see any other way, man.
I feel you, brother. I feel you. Well, thank you for joining me this evening. I
Hey,
appreciate
thanks for letting me
your
up, man.
contribution, man. You're always welcome. All right. So let
All
me
right.
give my closing remarks and then I'll be out of here. All right.
All right.
So look, y'all, the only thing I wanted to do was to draw your attention to the research and the opinion of Adam Jones. And to be perfectly honest, prior to my experiences in life, I pretty much had the same viewpoint as Adam Jones, namely that there could be this reconciliation between feminists and people who advocate for issues related to black men and justice. But increasingly, I see that there are hard lines being drawn, but ultimately, black men need to hold the line because they're going to try to shame us into empathizing with their plight and the issues that they have. But there cannot be any empathy given if there's no empathy received. You also have to be able to understand the world from our standpoint and our perspective. You can't just proliferate your own views and push your own narrative without being willing to listen to your counterparts, to your sons, to your husbands, to your brothers, to your fathers, to your uncles. If you don't want to listen to what's going on with us, and if you feel like what we have to say about our pain is weak, beta male-ish, or whatever the case may be, when we're some of the most oppressed, some of the most dominated, some of the most subjected to violence, and some of the most maligned individuals in the society, well then, if you can't hear what we have to say and you're not going to be a support system, we got to divest. It's just that simple. We have to leave you alone. I do agree with that, but we also have to work to change these systems to give these women unfair advantages, because women, at the end of the day, they're humans just like we are. I've never been the one to say that men are perfect. We're not. But guess what? Neither are you. So if you're a woman, listen to this. Just understand that you're not perfect and you ain't the only one with issues and problems. So at the end of the day, man, I'll holler at y'all, man. I'll try to get in tomorrow. I don't know what I'm going to talk about tomorrow, but I'll figure something out. But until that time, man, y'all be peaceful. One.